Hi, I'm David Marshall. I'm a professor of New Media, Communication, and Cultural Studies at Deakin University. And my area of expertise is celebrity, but very specifically persona and public persona. And I've written quite a few books, one of them which has had a second edition called Celebrity and Power, and another one that's just about to come out with Sean Redmond called Companion to Celebrity. And that's it.
Well, I'm Dr. Jackie Raphael from Curtin University in Western Australia. I'm from a creative advertising and design background, but my research is mainly focused on celebrity culture. So I look at endorsements, branding, and at the moment I'm working with Celia Lamb on a few papers and eventually a book on Bromance. So today we'll be talking about persona studies specifically and looking at authenticity behind that. So would you like to start by telling us about your creation of PCP, which is based on persona studies?
Yeah, PCP, which sounds vaguely like a drug, is maybe a very scholarly drug, but it stands for persona, celebrity, and publics. Those three terms. And so one of the areas of the sort of three areas, they're all kind of interconnected, is persona. And persona was persona studies more or less developed from realizing that, especially over the last 10 or 15 years, what we thought of as a kind of will to fame, which occupied the entertainment industries, is actually pandemic, just everywhere in our world right now. And part of the reason why it has gone so viral isn't quite the word, but so completely through our culture, is that our online world is so focused on personal identity that we are constantly provoked, invoked, asked to construct a public version of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And what's different about that is that that public version of ourselves is not the way we dress, the way that we construct ourselves to walk out in the world, but it is mediatized. And that makes it, in a lot of ways, the images that we put up on our social media sites, the things that we post and share, makes us, in a sort of micro world, producing a public version of ourselves that is a little bit like celebrity culture. And so we have something that just is relatively understudied, which is this production of reputation, this production of a public version of ourselves, which is actually shifting not only our social lives, dating sites, all those things, but also our professional lives, as more and more people and employers and others expect that we do have a public persona and we do have a kind of portfolio as we move through our everyday lives and our working lives.
That's very true. It's almost like everyone has to have a LinkedIn account at the very least, and Facebook, Twitter, there's an increased expectation.
And what happens, and this is the intriguing thing for me, is that it's not just that we're producing it for an audience outside, like the people we know, our friends, our followers. It's that it is a kind of laboring of the self. It's a kind of work that we monitor ourselves more than anybody else will monitor our social media sites. So take a look at it. We see what we're doing in our Twitter feeds. We see our Facebook wall, other ways that we've liked or connected to other forms of media. And we basically edit ourselves constantly to produce the best version, for some, the worst version, because they're trying to create the equivalent of what would be a celebrity scandal. They want people to react in some level as if it is news.
Yeah, that's very true. It's all about the number of likes you get or retweets. So
right.
Sometimes I think even the everyday person wants to create a little bit of hype around their own image.
A little controversy, a sense of why you would look at this. And the online world is driven by lists, best, worst. Yeah. You have to look at this. And we're, over time, as this becomes a kind of normal experience, that we produce this public version of ourselves, we become a little bit better at doing those things. And some people are better at it than others. And so we're developing a new kind of notion of impact, of reputation and prestige, which kind of, it isn't completely, but is kind of connected to the century-old celebrity structures, which, different than us, probably had many people supporting this construction of Greta Garbo or Marlene Dietrich or, well, it was slightly controversial because of how he died, Rock Hudson, or on and on in the past. And what's interesting to look at right now is those celebrities who use social media and use an online identity to produce a new connection to their audience, their fans. And someone like, Lady Gaga is really interesting. She has all these little monsters floating around.
She's got one of the most followers as well.
Yes.
Because of how she interacts with them.
That's right. And because she personalizes their interactions, what we're also observing is something that has actually changed. Celebrities have always had a kind of clear parasocial relationship to their audience. But there's something about social media which produces, yes, it's still parasocial. It's not that we know them, but it's, and Lady Gaga is very good at this. She's able to make it as if it's interpersonal, as if it's something heartfelt within her and her fans, and the connection is much stronger than maybe some other people. So people like Lady Gaga are examples, potentially, not exact examples, but how a kind of construction of a public version, a persona, moves, and how it can be a kind of teaching mechanism for how other people might imagine their lives and then their public version of their lives.
Now you mentioned Lady Gaga, and I think what's interesting about her is fans seem to think she's very authentic, which is why they relate to her. She talks about, having issues with her weight. She talks about body image issues generally, and so people feel like they can relate to her. She's an icon for homosexuality as well, and in that sort of representation. And what I wonder is, how authentic can a person be when they don't go by their real name?
Yeah, the reason why I've been drawn to the term persona is that in a lot of ways it comes from the Greek. It means mask, it means all those sorts of things. And a lot of those connotations are quite negative. It's not true identity, it's some sort of false identity. But the reason why I think it's useful to think of persona is they are always strategic. And we have multiple identities that we operate with. So Lady Gaga will have a totally different persona, probably in her close social and family circle, than what she has produced as a performing identity, which is probably a little bit different than her social media identity, which is almost, not completely, but self-selecting that they're closer and closer fans. And she recognizes the different kinds of social bonds that are involved in each of those sorts of levels and produces multiple ones. The same way as I am different if I am at a soccer tournament as a dad, and no one knows me except as the father of someone playing on the field. My persona is, I'm just, son's father, that's it. So Lady Gaga realizes, in a sense, that it's not so much authenticity in terms of that this one identity is everything, but it's authenticity that is related to her kind of social network. So another term that I use to identify a kind of, not authenticity, but a recognizable and relatively stable identity is, I use the idea of seriality, that it has a repetition of how we might consider this particular person. So when we think of Lady,
consistency.
Yeah, so we say, all right, she is, she's flamboyant, she's over the top, she's a performing icon that you can't quite identify what she's going to do next. She's going to try to shock. All those things actually, even though they seem different, they're quite constant.
Yeah.
And people say, all right, that's how I expect it. Same way as David Bowie might have had that,
Yeah.
maybe still does. That
Madonna
notion,
as well.
yeah, that they are known as a transforming identity as much, and that becomes their new constant. And other performers are pretty clear that they're almost always the same. Think of George Clooney. As much as we think, he might be an intelligent person, the reason why we might think he is an intelligent person, I think he's a playboy too, but he's married now, is that he has consistently drawn on roles that always present him as the smartest person in the room. And so in a serial identity way, we think of his real identity, his persona that's all we have to work with, is,
I think it's also based on the charity work that he does, so he represents himself in that light of trying to make a difference, being a leader, that kind of thing.
He has a political element to it, and he's consistent with it. Probably the ones that are inconsistent, they might have another constant.
Well, I was just going to say about Madonna. She's rebranded herself a few times throughout her career. Does that take away from the authenticity of her image?
I think over time, someone like Madonna she's in a field that is driven by youth, and no matter what she does at this stage in her career, it's difficult to imagine it not being, or difficult to imagine that it's new. It's much easier to imagine that she's playing on her power and influence of how she has constructed herself before. So the danger with someone like Madonna is that her characterization, like Lady Gaga, is the idea of new. But when you go through 30 years, it's pretty difficult to not see it as a marketing ploy.
That's true.
Instead of saying, wow, that's an interesting version of Madonna that's come out now.
Well, speaking of rebranding, Angelina Jolie did a huge rebrand. So wild child to this almost Mother Teresa type image, adopting every kid in the world, and also marrying Brad Pitt, becoming this star couple, star power. What do you think about that sort of branding and rebranding in her image, and how authentic is that as a persona?
Yeah, I mean, every person, and this goes right across everyone who has a notion of a persona, has to make the decision of where their private and public line and boundary is. And the interesting thing about Angelina Jolie is, well, she comes from filmic background in terms of her father, but she has always acknowledged, in a sense, the presence of the audience. So she has been much more comfortable in allowing a larger portion of her private life to inform her public life. One of the things that I wrote about recently is that there's also this odd thing with film actors, is that no matter what they are doing, they are inauthentic, because it's fictive. Everything, fictional characters here, there, and everywhere. And what's interesting with a group of them, George Clooney would be one, Matt Damon would be another, is that, and Angelina Jolie would be the best example, is that they are quite driven to construct an authentic persona. Again, it's strategic, because it gives them a greater sense of value than any role that they might achieve, however good they are. Quite different than, say, Meryl Streep, who maintains a kind of acting persona. I think Jolie, like Clooney, maintains a notion that there's some integrity in what she chooses, and that has happened over time. But comes from a tradition, for Jolie at least, that at least she was a kind of a committed persona even when she was a bad girl. And there's this sense of a kind of invested commitment wherever she is. The reality is we don't know. She might be an impossible person to hang out with in the home. She might have mood swings that we can't even imagine. But she has learned to construct a boundary into her private world enough that she can control that maybe very intimate world because people are getting enough of her elsewhere.
So is it more to do with perceived authenticity? So the consumers perceiving it as being authentic in the image that they see, so it's consistent to the media, to the consumers.
Yes.
And it doesn't really matter to us what's happening at home? Is that the case?
Well, there's one push, as you would know in celebrity culture, is that there's one push that we want to know more. We want to know the real. And you're pushed that way, but you're absolutely right. It's perceived as authentic. She has maintained this idea of being an ambassador for children, for a goodwill ambassador for the United Nations. She has, adopted children in a way that, makes Madonna look a little clumsy, and has surrounded herself with, I can't remember the number of children, but it must be around six.
But obviously 3 being their own children.
Yeah, their own children, and 3 other, and that is for anyone who knows anything about children, is amazing. Even if you have help here, there, and everywhere, at some point that reconnects with an audience and says, well, I know that experience. I know what parenting is about. And
it's interesting with their parenthood as well. They often try to show how involved they are as parents by having those photos of them traveling with their kids or out on the street with the kids. And I think that's also part of that branding that they try to reinforce.
Yeah, they do. And it's a sense of normalcy. And again, a kind of constructed privacy.
Yeah.
Not to say that paparazzis are not always trying to push the boundaries that a persona construction is trying to maintain. Other very famous people are quite comfortable with knowing that the paparazzi is part of their persona as well, because they know that if a paparazzi is producing something, it is probably likely that it will produce a news event, and probably that will attract attention to them. And if there's one thing that celebrities are aware of, that we're kind of aware of in our own little small followers, friendship circles of social media and life, is they understand how an attention economy kind of works. And they play it. And again, it's strategic. It may appear, I think you're accurate, it may appear to be authentic, and in its consistency, we believe it.
Yeah, that's true. Speaking of Brad Pitt, Angelina, George Clooney, I think it's another interesting factor is, which I mentioned before, is that I do a bit of research into bromances. So the authenticity behind George Clooney and Brad Pitt's friendship with Matt Damon as well, it's a love triangle of bromance. And people's
and there's this Jimmy
with
Kimmel, and there's a couple,
so
there's
many
a
of them.
whole group of
connection. There's
comic
Ben
actors
Affleck with Matt Damon as well, and all these sorts of things. But it is interesting to see who are actually friends off screen and who are doing it for promotional use. So something that I'm looking at personally is the X-Men bromance as well. So between Hugh Jackman, Michael Fassbender, and James McAvoy, they use that as a promotional tool for X-Men, but how much do they hang out outside of filming? There was a whole, conversation through media about Brad Pitt not attending George Clooney's wedding. Apparently that was big news. So it's interesting when that authenticity, I guess, starts to break in people's eyes, they
start to say, well, maybe this isn't
Are they
right.
not real friends? Yeah.
Are they real friends? Yeah. And the question, and that comes from, Richard Dyer's original sort of discussion in Stars about the search for the real.
Yes.
And so it's a constant, the search for identity is relatively constant. That's something that we look for all the time. And so we are always looking for the moment that reveals something deeper. Where does that come from? Well, that comes from probably the way that the 19th and 20th century, particularly the end of the 19th century, became obsessed with the idea that truth was somehow buried in the psyche. It's a Freudian psychoanalytical tradition that we believe that if we get rid of these masks, get rid of all these layers of how we deal in our public world, we'll get to a truer sense of who someone is. And in that truth, we gain knowledge, and in that knowledge, we're a better person. But I think it's probably a better reality to think that the idea of total authenticity is a fabrication.